when I describe that to people, sometimes they immediately assume that we are trying to compete with Google Translate. We are not trying to compete with Google Translate. Google Translate's super cool. It's great for certain tasks, but what we're doing is automating the human translation of this content and making it much more efficient. This is largely an industry that's been driven by people. They throw people at the problem. They have project managers. There's lots of processes that are driven on spreadsheets. We've created a cloud platform that allows the process to be easier. Therein lies the pitch. If you guys want to hear more about us, please come over to the booth. We can show you a demo, and you can check it out. We have lots of cool customers, Spotify and John Deere and Tesla. I'm going to talk about GoPro. So in the words of Nelson Mandela, speak to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. Speak to him in his native language, or the language that he knows best, and it goes to his heart. A little bit corny, but what we are really doing at Smartling is trying to enable a process that is only logical. Why would a user who is a native speaker want to, even if they're multilingual or bilingual, want to execute a purchase online or on their phone in a language other than the one they understand the best? And so if we can make that easy for you, why not make that offer to your client? You have the ability to ship internationally. You have the ability to ship internally for US Spanish. Many times we hear from our customers the reason they don't do it is because they think it's too hard. So speaking of hard, is there anybody in here that's been involved with a web or mobile localization project? Just a show of hands. So my condolences. It's really, really hard to do, I think, unless it's been a small project. If it's more than 5,000 or 10,000 words and you're doing more than 2 or 3 languages, it's a lot of herding cats. It's a big pain in the butt. We created our software to automate that process to make it much, much easier. And the whole point behind it is, why not do it if it's important for your business and if there aren't any other thresholds to entry? Now, for Glenn and the wine enthusiasts, so much of their business is built on that human connection, that follow-up. They would have to hire bilingual customer support people who are also wine experts. So it's not perfect for everybody, but increasingly it is perfect for most businesses and most online businesses. So that's my sad face for how hard it is. So let's talk about the big opportunity, the growing global middle class. So there's a study that's been done by the Brookings Institution that talks about how the middle class, which is dominated by America, the United States of America, and Europe right now, about 50%, that by 2030 we will only be 22% of the market for the middle class, and that it'll more than double from 2 billion to 4.9 billion people. So to put that in perspective, 3 billion people will be the global middle class in a very short period of time. And they are the core buying category, as you know. So a lot of people ask us, well, what's that global middle class? Where is it growing? Where is that activity happening? We all know about the growth in China. We all know that China's population is exploding, that their industry and commerce are exploding. But there's actually massive growth in other Asian countries as well. And the same study has predicted that by 2030, 64% of the global middle class will be in Asia. So we are old news. And as you know, across Asia and across parts of the world where the predominant languages are not FIGS-P, French, Italian, German, Spanish, there are dozens, literally dozens of languages that you need to be able to address your consumers in. And this is just the beginning. This is absolutely just the beginning of the process. And we're telling our customers and helping our customers to get out ahead of it. So one of the reasons this growth is happening so quickly links back to the core nature of the internet. We all know how quickly the internet exploded here in the United States, but a recent study by Internet World Stats talked about the rate of entry onto the internet across the globe. Believe it or not, they are predicting that there are more than 700,000 people logging onto the internet every day for the first time. So if you look at Eric Schmidt's quote in this particular CNN article, right now, for every one person online, there's 2 people in the world that are not. He's predicting that in 7 years, everyone in the world will be online. I think that might be a bit of hyperbole. There's going to be a lot of people that are not online 7 years from now. It certainly would be in Google's best interest to have more people there. But at the rate of 700,000 people a day, that's nearly 8 people a second that are logging on for the first time. That's not happening here in the United States, where we have nearly 80% internet penetration. It's happening in Asia. It's happening in South America. It's even happening in Africa. So we need to get out ahead of that, and it's really no surprise that it may not be everybody that's online by the end of the decade, but at that rate of growth, there'll be a substantial number of people online by the end of this decade and beyond. And an important point there, and I know that most of the folks in the room are interested in this, it's not going to be happening on the big screen. It's going to be happening on the small screen. Most of those new subscribers logging on every day are logging on their smartphones, and that trend is not going to decline. It's only going to continue to increase. So what does this mean to you? It means there's more diversity in your customer base, and you should start to plan to address it now. I didn't ask this at the top of the hour, but how many folks in the room are either helping their clients or are merchants doing multilingual content delivery right now? Okay, so maybe a third. So many of you might be here to learn more about it, and that's a good thing. But the middle class is growing as quickly as I talked about before, and it used to be that you could hand out a number of very high-profile languages to reach them, but that number is increasing. And the easier you make it to deploy any given new language, the better the process is going to be over time. So what happens with a lot of our customers is to say, oh, we put up Spanish, and the results were okay, and we had a little bit of lift in our sales, but it was such a pain in the neck that we don't want to go back to the grindstone and do the next one. And that's the last thing that should happen. So, okay, you've discovered that there's this massive growth. You've discovered there's a tremendous opportunity in terms of reaching an audience. That audience would like to see the content in your native language. Well, what happens when you finally reach them? So this slide talks specifically about one category, one example, which is mobile applications. And Distimo did a report on this that showed that, on average, just in the first week, when a mobile application in the iPhone store is put up in a new language or multiple languages, downloads increase 126%. 126%. And then on average, revenue goes up. There's a revenue lift of 26% per language, not just 26% in aggregate, but 26% per language. So recognizing that mobile applications are smaller, they're tighter, there's fewer strings, it's still incredible to think how quickly results can be achieved, both in terms of downloads and engagement with the product, as well as actual revenue, net incremental revenue to these businesses. So obviously the takeaway there is if you're going to market with a mobile application or even mobile web, it behooves you to get that application into as many languages as possible, assuming your business is appropriate for it. So we talked a little bit about access. We talked a little bit about what occurs on the lift. Our good friends at Common Sense Advisory, which is essentially the analyst group that studies our industry, the localization and translation industry, did a study just a few years ago, and their outcome and analysis was that in order to reach 90% of the world economic opportunity online, that you need to speak or deliver your content in these 13 languages. And I'll let you read the languages. They're not surprising, the ones you'd expect to be there, Japanese and Portuguese, obviously in addition to English. But there is a method to this madness, and it is based upon not just the massive amount of audience, but the members of that audience that have economic power and dollars to spend. So here's a few examples. I'm sort of in stacked rank order. Every family I know has somebody in their family that's learning Chinese because they want to be able to have that for their lifetime as the Chinese economic growth continues. If you put Chinese on your website, you can reach almost 23% of the online audience. That's massive. It's incredible, but that only represents 6% of the economic spending power of the web wallet, if you will. Spanish is 9%. It's still a pretty big number, and that jumps to 9%, almost 8% rather, of the wallet spend. German is only 3.5% and yet 8.5% of the economic spend. And the king, after English, is Japanese, where you're reaching only 4.5% of the internet population, but 10.5% of the spending power. So it's not surprising on the previous slide that Japanese and German are number 2 and number 3 in terms of the languages the Common Sense Advisory recommends that you deploy in order to get to the spend, get to the economic components of the web. So what happens now? You've identified the scale, you've identified ways to reach them, and you identified the people that you're reaching that have the most money. What happens? Time and time again, in studies that are done, putting up multiple languages on an e-commerce site or on an e-commerce application on a mobile device increase sales. The main stat to take away from this is that more than half of consumers surveyed by Common Sense Advisory, this was about 2,500 European consumers, about half of them said they'd be willing to spend more money on the same product if it was offered in their language, which is a little crazy. But the reality is, as I said at the top of the hour, all of us would be more comfortable buying in our own language. I took 2 years of high school French. I'm not going to be buying anything in French, but when I get to a website, even if it's in UK English, I would much rather see everything spelled in my name, in my language, in the way that it's spelled in my world. I would like to see it localized to my currency because somehow I feel more comfortable that way. You can only imagine when the dominant language is English, how it feels in reverse, and many of you in the room may know that experience. You may be bilinguals and have had the experience in reverse. The other statistics on this slide, which I thought were interesting, is 72% of these consumers said that they only browse websites in their native language, and that they are really only willing to buy a product in their native language. These were astounding stats because, when I go to Europe, I assume that everybody speaks English. And if you're walking across the Palazzo in Milan and you want to get a coffee, you probably could get it in English. It might take a couple tries, but English is going to work. But if you're trying to do business with the people there online, you need to put it up in Italian. That's what these statistics show. So cameras, good. Briefcases, harder. This is really the most astounding thing here is that 9 out of 10 internet users said that given a choice of languages, they would always visit the website in their own languages. 9 out of 10 times. 1 out of 5 Europeans said that they would never browse a website other than their own. So let me take this to the case study that we talked about in the title of the presentation. And this is GoPro. So anybody familiar with GoPro cameras? So these guys have really created an incredible category. They're based in Half Moon Bay in California. They make an HD camera that can connect to surfboards and bicycles and bungee cords and I think a spacesuit. Guy jumped out of a satellite or some similar spacecraft device. Incredible traction in the US market. They've essentially created a category that everybody is catching up to now. Not surprisingly, the device has international appeal. Action sports junkies are not just in the United States, although the X Games would seem to indicate so. They're happening all over the world. And there was a tremendous amount of demand on the part of the GoPro consumer base, not just through their consumers in those regions, in over 150 countries, through their distributors rather, but also online. So, there's more pictures of action sports happening in other countries. I want to make sure I get through those. I think that's Rio. And there's Dubai. So GoPro reached out to us in September of 2011. And they told us that they wanted to translate their website into multiple languages for a couple of reasons. One, they were getting a lot of requests from consumers who needed help and support online. They wanted to browse the products online. Their product base was diversifying. They were releasing more products more quickly. And the ability to have their website and all of its promotional capability and its conversion to e-commerce was extremely important to them. So we said, that's great, that's awesome, that's what we hear from a lot of our clients. We're ready to do this for you. Tell us what you want. They said, well, it's September 15th. We would like to translate the website into 6 new languages, and we would like to have it up on October 15th. Now, for any of you who raised your hand before and said that you've done web translation projects before, GoPro's website has 50,000 English words on it. They wanted to translate it to 6 languages in a month. That's the kind of project that should take 6 months minimum, maybe a year. And I don't even talk about what it would cost if you did it through an agency. So we were able to do it for them in 3 weeks. And again, professionally translated content, largely due to the way that our software works. No additional IT staff resources on their part once we launched the projects. It really was an incredible capability of time to market. That was their number one priority. They knew the customers were there. They knew they had access to the folks who wanted those languages. What they wanted to do was get to market quickly. And the driver, just so you know, was they were releasing the Hero 2 camera, which is now the Hero 3. And they wanted to get that out in all 6 languages. And they also wanted to have all of this content available and ready for the holiday season. So if you found this type of project hard, it doesn't have to be hard, and it doesn't have to take forever. So that's a good segue to something that we often talk about in the translation business is you have 3 choices to make: good, fast, cheap. Pick 2. You can't have all 3. Many people have done Google Translate, which is fast and cheap. If any of you are marketers or agencies, or if any of you sell products that are complex and important and well-branded, Google Translate would never work. We all know that. It's going to read like bad poetry, and in most cases, it's going to be incredibly damaging to your brand. I have a funny story there. We did the TechCrunch Disrupt Beijing website for TechCrunch, and translated from English to Chinese. And when the project was being done, there's a switch in our software that allows you to machine translate to QA, just to check and make sure everything looks right. And our folks loaded it up, and the headline of the homepage was, TechCrunch welcomes you to Beijing. TechCrunch Disrupts welcomes you to Beijing. And the machine translation was, TechCrunch brings trouble to China. So I can only imagine what else is going on. But the message is, good, fast, and cheap doesn't always have to be the 3 choices. Pick 2. We can offer all 3, and it's essentially what we provided for GoPro. Good in the sense that the quality was there from professional translators, fast because of the way the software worked, and cheap because the ongoing management capability and the way that the software is deployed is very, very affordable and something that they really have enjoyed. So my marketing folks thought that because they wanted to go to market so quick that Top Gun would be inappropriate. So Maverick and Goose have made an appearance in my presentation for reasons I cannot describe. So great. GoPro got their content up there. They translated in multiple languages. We obviously hold our clients' results and stats and data confidential. Suffice to say, they haven't shared a lot with us because they want to keep that pretty close to the vest, but they've been with us for almost 3 years. They're very happy. They're adding more languages. They're adding more content. And it stands to reason. There's really 3 takeaways that I want to leave you with based on the priority and the importance of deploying content for your consumers, either on your websites or in your mobile apps or in your business documentation, in your collateral materials, in multiple languages. The first and foremost, it's indisputable, it drives sales. It's not right for everybody. There may be some barriers to entry that go far beyond translation and localization. But plain and simple, people want to do business in their own language, and if given the choice, they will, and they will more. And Common Sense Advisory has said that people are 6 times more likely to buy when their product is offered in their native language. The second piece is less just about the transaction itself, but it's the promotion of your brand and the ability to communicate with that audience in the language they speak. So I think about a product for us like SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey has been with us a few years too, and their clients are very loyal. If you use SurveyMonkey as a marketer, you tend to come back and it's now your survey tool of choice. And they recognized that they still weren't seeing the same kind of growth in terms of additional surveys by folks who were not coming into the site with English as their primary language. So they now run 17 languages. They do more than 51% of their international revenue outside of English, which is astounding. So it's important to engage with your audience as a loyalty component, as a brand relationship component, and I think we heard that from the wine enthusiasts. And the last point I'll talk about is be local. Translating and communicating with multilingual consumers is more than just translating the content. It's also providing an experience that's localized. It's about the content, the colors, the tone, the approach. And I think about Pinterest as in this example. We're working with Pinterest on their website. We saw the pin board from the wine enthusiast. We, of course, translate the experience about registering and pinning and setting up all your preferences and doing all of the word-based stuff in the Chrome or the design and the layout. But for each locale, we're actually helping Pinterest put up local imagery that is specific to that market. So if you're on the Great Britain site, which again is not a heavy translation job, you're seeing imagery of London, you're seeing British cars, you're seeing British countryside. Whereas if you're on the French site, you're seeing Paris and you're seeing images of French food and a French countryside. And that is just all about creating that local experience. So you have to think about all three, but for an audience like this one here at Etail, the opportunity in front of you for speaking your customer's language, both in terms of what language they speak and where they live, is an extremely important aspect and opportunity for you to increase your sales. So that's all I have for you. I'm willing to take some questions, and I will see you at the bar after our last presentation. Thank you. I'm going to leave this here.
So what's the process for, some websites are more kind of straightforward, and some have more colloquialisms, and how does when you're doing QA, like how do you make sure that kind of the feeling and the tone carries through in the translation as well? It seems like that would be more difficult than just like straightforward.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, and I should stress, I know there's probably a mix in the room of people who have had experience with this and some people who haven't, so I'll try to keep it down the middle. When I joined Smartling 3 years ago, I had never dealt with localization or translation in any way. I just thought it was literal. You take a paragraph, it translates into another paragraph, and you're good to go. Any business in our space, not just Smartling, but any business in our space starts the project by creating a style guide, which is essentially an instruction to the translators to say, this is the tone. It's a formal tone, it's an informal tone. In French, use the formal U or the informal U. Use these date formats. Use all these types of numerical formats for years and things like that, time, temperature. So the style guide is extremely important, and you're going to miss that nuance if you don't have it. The second thing you create is a glossary. And what the glossary does is instruct on how to consistently translate words that are very common, but maybe brands or company names or things that should be consistent across the way. So there are tools and guides in every translation project, not just the ones that we manage at Smartling, but that's how you get around it. And the other piece is you have to hire professional translators who are not just bilinguals, who know the nuance, live in that locale, and understand the nuance of that particular dialect. Any other questions? Just because I'm not a wine guy, you don't have to make questions for me. One more. Microphone.
Does any of this apply to U.S. speaking Spanish?
Absolutely. And so there are 2 points I didn't make because I forgot. So, multilingual consumers exist here in the United States. Over the next decade, Hispanics will make up 30% of the U.S. population. And an incredible amount of buying power in the U.S. So that's part of multilingual communication. It's global communication. It just happens to be here in the United States, so there's no shipping consideration. U.S. Spanish is a tremendous opportunity. We've got tons of data on that for you. If you want to give me your card after, I can share CSA studies and Pew studies that talk about the importance of it. But it's only getting more important, and the Hispanic market and Spanish speakers in the U.S. are only growing in population and will continue to do so. The other point that I wanted to make is most of the folks here, if they run websites that are selling product, they are by their very nature very complex websites. The content is dynamic, the database is constantly changing, the imagery is constantly changing. There are transactions occurring with third-party applications, both in terms of reporting and e-commerce conversion. That's another element that makes this process really, really hard. And there are a number of solutions on the market to address that. We think ours is pretty good. And we handle an incredible number of highly dynamic websites that are combining static content and dynamic content in the same page, personalized content that's being created dynamically. We can handle all of it. So if you think that complexity of your website is a barrier to entry, it's not. We'd be happy to talk to you about it.
I just got a couple questions for you. You probably just touched on it. So here.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. So a lot of websites, as you said, there are a lot of images and banners. And how do you guarantee the translation for those components because they're like hard-coded? And the second question is, how do you guarantee the quality of the translation? Do you have a team or do you hire a third-party, translation team to do the QA?
Great question. So I'm going to take them in reverse order. So first of all, we are translation service agnostic. We do have translators. They're all subcontractors. We have thousands. And the reason we have so many is that we need subject matter experts in every single language. and we need people to be able to be staffed across multiple customers who are running simultaneously. So we will pair you with the right translators who are certified. Every professional translation organization, not just Smartling, will typically provide at least 2 passes, a professional translator and then an editor. So there's, in effect, a built-in QA process. We give our customers through our software the ability to do a 3rd pass, which is essentially a proofing pass, where somebody on staff or somebody that they know and trust is spot checking that content in addition. We do offer a warranty. Most organizations do. Over a certain period of time, if you come back and say, you know what, we don't like the tone, it's not quite right, or this was too literal, or it's just flat out wrong, we'll redo it. And that's true for most translation organizations, not just Smartling. But I do want to touch on the point that we're agnostic, and one of the things our software is really good at is allowing you to have multiple translators collaborate from any source you want. We provide crowdsourcing software. About 20% of our customers are actually crowdsourcing it using their subscribers, companies like Path, companies like Foursquare, these big social networks where their subscribers are more than happy to participate in the process the same way Facebook and Twitter users do. So that's a bit on the translation. On the images, that's a tough nut to crack. You know, if you have photoshopped in the text in your file, number one, we can't extract that from your website automatically, and number two, we can't replace it automatically, even if we have the best translators in the world. So what we do is we work with our clients to get all those images stored in a single folder. We provide the translation. We type those translations back in and provide the content, and we either provide the desktop publishing services to create the new versions, or we pass those translations and allow our clients or their agencies to create the new versions. But an important point is, for the vast majority of our customers, the way we manage images, all those images remain on your infrastructure. So if you've got a content delivery network like Akamai, where you're delivering those images, they all go back there. There's no change to the workflow. There's no change to your CMS. We're just helping you get the images translated. But it does make it more difficult, and we encourage our customers at the point that they're going to embark on these projects, if it's the first time, to start changing those images up to include dynamic text that can be updated automatically without ripping and replacing. Thanks very much.